Hi there! Hello, my dear students. I am Dr. Heidi Cabasan. I am a faculty of the College of Arts, Sciences, and Technology at Mater Dei College, and I am handling this Philippine Literature course. I hope you are seated comfortably where you are. I hope you are safe in your respective homes, and I hope you are excited for our online class. This week, we are going to start with our first lesson, which is all about defining what is literature. Are you excited? So, I know you have heard of this word a lot of times before. What comes to your mind when you hear of the word literature? Etymologically speaking, literature came from the Latin word litera, which means letters or acquaintance with letters. And there are other various definitions of literature. One says literature is language in use that provides insights and intellectual stimulation to the reader. So it's the language that writers use as a tool to make us cry, to motivate us, to make us fall in love, to arouse feelings in us. Literature is a product of a particular culture. That's why when we read literature, we get to be wiser, culturally speaking, because we get to get a glimpse of what their culture is like simply by reading literature. Literature is an art that reflects the works of imagination, aesthetics, and creative writing, which are distinguished for the beauty of style and expression. And it can also be defined as an expression of our emotion, of thoughts, beliefs, aspirations, and dreams of humanity in general and of man in particular. So, those are just a few of definitions of literature. Another one, basically, we can sum up all of those definitions and come up with this one very short definition. This is actually one of my favorite definition of literature. It simply says literature is life. Well, we can live without literature. Honestly speaking, literature is not like water or air or food that we need to sustain and live and breathe and survive. But without literature, what kind of life would that be? Literature is life because everything, every experience says that human beings experience are all chronicled in literature. They are all told in literature. So name any human experience of falling in love, of being happy, of getting angry, of achieving something, of failing, of dying. Those are human experiences that are all told in stories, in songs, in novels, in drama, in poetry. Literature, therefore, is life. There's another definition from Mr. Cirilo Bautista, one Filipino writer. He said, literature raises life to a new level of meaning and understanding, and in the process restores sanity and justice in an insane and unjust world. So now that we have gotten to know the what of literature, let us get to know the why of literature. Why is it important to study literature? There are so many reasons that we can come up on the importance of studying literature. First, it expresses our emotions, beliefs, aspirations, and sentiments. It reflects our ideologies and philosophies of life. It informs, it entertains, and teaches a lesson. I hope you can recall to mind an inspiring story that you've read, There are so many stories of such, those that tell a lesson. It allows one to discover himself and grow through the exposure to the beliefs, attitudes, values, customs, and traditions of the people of the world. By reading literature, we get to discover ourselves. We get to realize why we acted as such in a given situation. We get to realize why things happen the way they should. Another reason is that it enables the reader to appreciate literary masterpiece and value the meaning of life. It also allows one to understand literary trends and techniques. And another one, it makes us realize the universality of events in human life, which we need to understand and accept. Another reason is that it enables students to understand the values of other people of the world. So basically, literature widens our perspectives in life, and it also widens our horizons. We don't look at life in a narrow way, but we look at life in a bigger and wider perspective. We don't get to think of just ourselves. We become selfless in a way of thinking about other human beings as well. Now, there are these 7 literary standards. These are the criteria, these are the standards to determine whether a piece of writing should be called literature. Mind you, not all that is put into writing can be considered literary. If I ask you to write a short essay, would that be literature already? Would that be considered to be literary already? It can be. It can also be possible that it won't pass these 7 criteria and be called as literature. First standard is the universality, meaning literature appeals to all people, regardless of race, regardless of language spoken, regardless of the color of their skin or the texture of their hair or the culture they are in. So that speaks of universality of literature. So it appeals to people everywhere. So Philippine literature are being studied, appreciated, and read and enjoyed by people in Korea, by people in Thailand, by people in Europe, in Germany, for example, or in Italy, even in Canada, in America, in Australia. In the same way that stories from Spain, for example, are enjoyed and appreciated by people here in the Philippines or in South Korea or in New Zealand or in Brazil, for example. Second literary standard is its artistry. Literature is an art. So, as I have mentioned, it's the language, it's the careful manipulation of words by writers that make it artistic. Intellectual value refers to how literature stimulates critical thinking. So, the more you read, the better critical thinker you will be. Suggestiveness refers to all the implied meanings of literature, found in literature, all the symbolisms and the implied meanings and nuances of literature. Some writers express their story in a way that is not too explicit. They would like the readers to keep on guessing. They would like the readers to interact with the text and with the writer and come up with their own ending of a story. Spiritual value refers to how literature motivates and inspires us. So, again, there are a lot of inspiring stories out there. Permanence, on the other hand, refers to how literature is always timely and always timeless. You see the works of Shakespeare, the drama, and the poetry of Shakespeare. Shakespeare died sometime in 1616. We are now in the year 2020, but Shakespeare may have long been dead, but his legacy lives on. All those all those poetry, all those drama, we get to enjoy them in this present day and age. While style refers to the particular way writers use their forms and styles of writing, again, to make us enjoy a literary piece. So again, those are the 7 literary standards. They are the criteria, the standard for which a piece of writing has to undergo so that it will be considered as literature. Let's proceed to the classification of literature. According to structure, literature can be fiction or non-fiction. Fiction is a literary work of imaginative narration. It's either oral or written, fashioned to entertain and to make the readers think, and more so to feel. While nonfiction is a literary work of real life narration or expression based on history and facts, whose main thrust is intellectual appeal to convey facts, theories, generalizations, or concepts about a particular topic. So fiction is all about imaginative narration, while nonfiction is based on real people and real events in real times. For example, Harry Potter is a work of fiction. Twilight, the Twilight series, is a work of fiction. Nonfiction includes, for example, the autobiography of Manny Pacquiao, if there's such a book, or My Life Story by Helen Keller, which is an autobiography still. So those are examples of fiction and nonfiction. According to genre, literature can be prose, poetry, or drama. Prose is like when we look at a certain page of a book, we get to distinguish whether it's prose or poetry based on how it's written, based on its form, for example. Because prose is written in sentences that make up the paragraphs, while poetry are written in lines that make up the stanzas of the poem. So just by looking at it, we get to determine which one is prose, which one is poetry. Other than that, poetry is also measured, which means in some types of poetry, the lines have a specific form, like this line should have just this number of syllables, this stanza should have just this number of lines. So poetry is measured in that sense. Poetry has rhythm, poetry has more imaginative language, and makes use of more symbolisms compared to prose. The third genre, drama, on the other hand, is a composition in prose form that tells a story in dialogue form. And this is intended to be performed before an audience. Now let's get to know the different types of literary forms under prose, under poetry, and under drama. So for the classifications of poetry, let's have those that are under narrative poetry first. Narrative poetry tells a story in a richly imaginative language. From the name itself, narrative. When you narrate, you tell a story, but still telling that story in verse form. First type of narrative poetry is the epic. An epic is a long narrative, it's lengthy. Some epics can be as long as a novel in prose. They are concentrated on a central figure, a hero, often times have supernatural powers. Epics are of two types: folk or popular epic and the literary epic. Folk or popular epic has no known author, while literary epic has distinct authorship. An example of folk epic will be Beowulf by an unknown writer. Beowulf is from English literature, so from England. So there's no known writer, it's anonymous, so that makes it fall under folk or popular epic. Paradise Lost, another epic from English literature, is written by John Milton. So there is a known writer, and that makes it fall under literary epic. So that's the distinction between the two. Folk or popular epic has no known writer, while literary epic has known authors. Metrical romance is a long, rambling love story in verse. This was particularly popular during the Middle Ages when knighthood was in flower. So, the times of knights in shining armor and ladies in distress. So, those, that is where the metrical romance got its inspiration. Ballad are short narrative poems that are intended to be sung, and they can also either be folk or literary. Metrical tale is to poetry what the short story is to prose, and it's written in a simple and straightforward manner. So we have lyric poetry. So if narrative poetry tells a story in a richly imaginative language, lyric poetry expresses personal thoughts and feelings. First, we have the ode, which is an extended poem, usually complicated in meter, stanza forms, and always deals with serious themes such as immortality. So the Ode to a Nightingale and Ode to Melancholy by John Keats are just some of the examples of ode. Elegy, on the other hand, is a generally a poem of a subjective and meditative nature, and usually it's distinguished by its subject, which is usually about death. So the elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray is one good example. Songs are short lyric poems that are intended to be sung. So the songs you hear on the airwaves. What's your favorite song right now? Those songs are types of poetry, are under poetry. Simple lyric, on the other hand, are any short poems where the verse is especially musical or there is a marked suggestive emotional tone. The awit has 12 syllables or dodecasyllabic, we call that dodecasyllabic, which is sung with the accompaniment of the guitar. And the corrido has a measure of 8 syllables. We call that as octosyllabic, an example of which is the Ibong Adarna. For the awit, we have Francisco Baltazar's Florante at Laura as an example. There's also sonnet, which is also another um, type of lyric poetry. A sonnet has 14 iambic pentameter lines, and it has two types: the Italian sonnet or Petrarchan sonnet, and the English or the Shakespearean sonnet. Italian sonnet is also named as Petrarchan, named after Petrarco, who was an Italian poet who perfected the Italian form of the sonnet, while the English sonnet is named after Shakespeare, of course, William Shakespeare, who perfected that form of the sonnet as well. They differ according to how the ideas in the sonnet are written, and they also differ on the rhyming schemes. What's some of the rhyming schemes? Well, we generally get the rhyming scheme of a particular verse by looking at the last words of each line. So the Italian sonnet rhymes A B B A C D E C D E, while Shakespearean sonnet rhymes A B C D C D E F G G. So I'll be giving you an example in this next slide. This is Sonnet 29 by William Shakespeare. So basically, again, we get the rhyming scheme of a verse by looking at the last words of each line. And we always assign the first line with an A. A because it starts the alphabet. It's the first letter of the alphabet. So in here, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, the last word of the first line is eyes. The last word of the second line is state. We assign eyes with A, state with B. Cries rhymes with ice. So we assign that with an A. Fate rhymes with state. So we assign that with a B. So the first four lines of this sonnet says A, B, A, B. The second four lines, we have hope, which rhymes with scope, possessed, and least, which rhymes with each other as well. So that's CD, CD. Despising and arising rhymes with each other, state and gate. That's EF, EF. And the last two lines says brings and kings. They are couplets, they rhyme with each other. So that's a GG in the last two lines of our sonnet. So again, this English or Shakespearean sonnet rhymes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. So that's the rhyming scheme of an English sonnet. Another type of lyric poem is the haiku. A haiku is a short verse of Japanese origin, usually having 575 number of syllables. The first line has only 5 syllables, the second line has only 7, while the third line has 5 syllables. All in all, a haiku has only 17 syllables. The haiku was popularized by Matsuo Basho. One example here says, the fighting flashes and slashes through the darkness, a night heron's screech. So if you can count the first line, the fighting flashes has 5 syllables, and slashes through the darkness, that's 7, and a night heron's screech, that's another 5 syllables. So 575 number of syllables. Next, after the haiku, we have the limerick. The limerick is longer, a bit longer. It has 5 syllables, and this was popularized by Edward Lear. He was an Irish writer. Limericks consist of 5 anapestic lines. Lines 1, 2, and 5 of limericks have 7 to 10 syllables, and lines 3 and 4 of limericks have 5 to 7 syllables and also rhyme with each other. Therefore, lines 1, 2, and 5, they rhyme with each other and they are longer compared to lines 3 and 4. 5 anapestic lines because this is an anapest class. This is an example of an anapest. Dead, dumb. That's one anapest. Dead, dumb. This is another anapest. Dead, dumb. Dead, dumb. So an anapest is a type of metrical feet that has 3 syllables. The first two are unaccented and the third syllable is accented, therefore dead, dumb. In the sonnet, if we go back to the sonnet, it's in iambic pentameter. Sonnets are in iambic pentameter, and iamb is another type of metrical feet, and penta means 5, so that means each line of a sonnet has to have 10 syllables. Meaning penta, iambic pentameter, there are 5 iambs and each iamb has 2 syllables. So when in On the first line, if you're with me, when in, that's one I am. Disgrace, that's another I am. With for, that's another I am. Tune in, that's another I am. And men's eyes, that's another I am. So 10 syllables for every 14 lines of the sonnet. For the limerick, it's anapestic lines. So there's a particular musicality when we read limericks. It says diddy-dum, 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 diddy-dum. That is how it should be read, and it's also meant to be read aloud so that you can enjoy, appreciate the musicality, the rhythm of limericks. Again, da dum 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 da dum. Let's read a real one. Again, this is popularized by no other than Edward Lear. There was an old man in a boat who said, I'm afloat. When they said, no, you ain't, he was ready to faint, that unhappy old man in a boat. So you see, the running scheme of a limerick says A, meaning the first, second, and the fifth line rhymes with each other, and the third and the fourth line rhymes with each other as well. A. So again, there was an old man in a boat who said, I'm afloat, I'm afloat. When they said, no, you ain't, he was ready to faint, that unhappy old man in a boat. So you get to appreciate the rhythm. Another one says, there was a young lady whose eyes were unique as to color and size. When she opened them wide, people all turned aside that started away in surprise. So eyes, size, and surprise rhyme with each other, and wide and aside rhymes with each other as well. So you can see in the illustration just how wide the eyes of this young lady is. And limericks are meant to be funny. They're meant to be humorous. They're meant to be comical. They're of no serious themes. So it's just meant to elicit laughter and humor and give humor. There was another one. There was a young lady whose chin resembled the point of a pin, so she had it made sharp and purchased a harp and played several times with her chin. See, it's very funny actually. There was a young lady whose chin were resembled the point of a pin, so she had made it sharp and purchased a harp and played several tunes with her chin. So it's a really sharp chin actually. So again, that's Limerick. That's another verse popularized by Edward Lear. 5 lines. First, second, and the fifth line are longer than the third and the fourth line, and they rhyme A. And again, it's not of serious themes. They're supposed to be funny, humorous, and comical. Usually, the first line of a limerick introduces the character of the limerick. So, there's one first line, there was a young lady whose sin. It introduces Our Lady. In the previous one, we also had the young lady whose eyes were unique as to color and size, and the other one was about an old man in a boat. So that's like the format, the form of a limerick. Usually the first line introduces the character. All right, so those are the types of poetry or classification of poetry. Next, we will discuss how to make better sense of a poem. Sometimes you say, I poetry is very difficult. Poetry is very nose bleeding, but when we get to find some strategy on how to read poetry, we can get to actually appreciate the beauty and the message of poetry. So, how do we do that? First, Since vocabulary is one of our limitations in understanding what we read, not just poetry, but in any types of reading, it helps if we define the unfamiliar terms. Let's all start with that because let's admit it, that's one of our limitations. So, vocabulary. So, we look into the denotation and connotation of the words. Denotation means dictionary meaning, while connotation means the implied or suggested meaning of a word. So that's it. Like denotation, for example, how about the word snake? How do you define the word snake? So it's an animal. It's an animal that crawls. It can be venomous. It can not be venomous. Well, what about the connotation of the word snake? What would it mean if somebody calls you a snake? You're a snake. So that can't be good news, right? That would mean that you've betrayed somebody, that you're a traitor, or that you failed that person. So that's denotation and connotation of the word. Let's look into whether a word in of a particular verse is used denotatively or used connotatively. Is it the literal meaning or is it a symbolical or implied meaning? Next one would be imagery. Imagery refers to the use of sensory details or description that appeal to one or more of our senses. So basically, writers feed our senses. They make us see something, they make us hear something, or feel, or smell, or taste something. No? Next would be figurative language, which will be discussed separately. Rhythm refers to the pattern of beats created by the stressed and unstressed syllable. Again, rhythm is particularly present in poetry. So there's the arrangement of the stressed and unstressed syllables. For example, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. And for example, for a limerick. While meter refers to the regular recurrence of stressed and unstressed syllables that give a line of poetry a predictable pattern. Next would be a table of metrical feet. So we have iambic, which has two syllables. So basically, a foot is a basic unit of meter consisting of 2 or 3 syllables. We know of iamb from iambic pentameter in sonnet. Iamb has 2 syllables. The first one is unaccented, the second one is accented. So dum. The trocate is the opposite. It starts with accented syllable first, followed by unaccented one. The anapest, like in limerick, dum, has 2 unaccented syllables followed by accented syllable. And the dactyl is the opposite. It starts with accented syllable followed by 2 unaccented syllables, so dum de. While the spondee or the spondaic has 2 accented syllables. The process of determining the prevailing foot per line in poetry is called a scansion. Scansion. So the instruction would say scan this stanza of poetry and determine what type of metrical feet and line length is used. So that's scansion. Next would be the table of line lengths. So 1 foot is called monometer. 2 feet of a line of poetry is called dimeter. 3 trimeter. 4 is tetrameter. 5 feet, just like in iambic pentameter in a sonnet, that's pentameter. Penta means 5. Hexa for 6, hexameter. Heptameter for 7 feet, and octameter for 8 feet. That's table of line lengths. That refers to how long a line of a verse is. Well, the types of prose. Prose refers to literary work that is spoken or written within the common flow of the language. There are several types of prose. The first one is a novel. Are you fond of reading novels? What novel have you read lately? Novels are fictional prose narrative of considerable length. So they are lengthy. It is composed of several chapters with several hundreds of pages as well. Short story is a narrative involving one or more characters, one plot, and one simple impression. A legend is a fictitious tale, usually about origin. A fable, on the other hand, deals with animals and inanimate things that speak or act like people. It always tells a lesson to children, like the fable of the ant and the grasshopper, for example. Biography refers to the life account of a person written and published by another, while autobiography is a life account of a person written by himself. Diary records a man's life. Do you have a diary? Have you ever written a diary? Allegory is a story where characters are symbolic or allegorical. This is how writers during the Spanish period of Philippine literature wrote. So, to keep them from being arrested by the Spaniards, so they wrote their stories in allegory. The characters are symbolical. Satire is a literary work in which human follies and weaknesses are exposed to ridicule, while myths are sacred narratives, like Si Malakas at Si Maganda. Folk tales explain ancient people's origin, cultures, and their beliefs and traditions, while essay is a prose composition in moderate length that presents a tentative exploration or evaluation of a particular topic. So those basically are the types of prose. The last one would be the types of drama. So we have mentioned that as a literary genre, drama presents a story in dialogue form with the intention of being performed before an audience on stage. So there are types of drama. We have tragedy, the first one. This is a play in which the main character is brought to ruin or suffers great sorrow. That's tragedy. A comedy, on the other hand, is a play that brings laughter, where the protagonist leaps over all difficulties placed in his way. Melodrama is drawn from tragedy and characterized as something overstated, which concentrates on action. And then finally, we have farce, which is a play that brings laughter for the sake of laughter, usually making use of grossly embellished events like that of mga Jim Carrey movies, Liar Liar, Bruce Almighty. They are all under farce, under drama. So to wrap everything up, basically we defined what literature is, and we also outlined why it's important to study literature, and then we moved on to the different classification of literature according to structure. Literature can be fiction or non-fiction. According to genre, literature can be prose, poetry, or drama. And then we also named the different types of poetry and the different types of prose and the different types of literary genres under drama as well. And that basically ends our first lesson for the first week of our class. If you have any questions, do jot them down so you'll remember to ask me during our virtual meeting. So see you on the next video. I hope you learned something from this. Stay tuned, be updated with what is on your learning management system here in our Philippine literature course. So you will be guided as to the activities, assignments, videos, and supplementary notes that I will be giving you. Okay? So again, this is Ma'am Heidi Kabasan at your service. See you next week.